gonna do my first story time, and let's just see how this goes.
So if there's noise, I already apologize. There's like a crying baby and seemingly people getting murdered outside, so.
Okay, so this story time takes place 3 years ago. I was 19 years old, and every year since I was a baby, so for 23 years now, we've been going to the same beach town, which is a couple hours from my hometown in Italy. And this is like a pretty tiny place, so it's very easy to know everyone, and at least by sight, and for everyone to recognize you by sight, and especially since I've been going there forever and most of these places are family businesses, it's not like it changes every year. It's like a business has been there for 30 years or something like that. So I used to always go to this hairdresser since he opened, I think for like 8 or 9 years now. And yeah, at first, this hairdresser and I really didn't have any kind of, you know, like relationship. Like we weren't speaking even, because like I was a shy young girl. Like I think I started going there when I was like 13 or something. And we were both Scorpios, but the thing is like he was like a more extroverted version of me. And I always felt uncomfortable talking, so like we didn't really talk. But as I got older, like 17, 18, we started having like bullshit conversations, but still talking. Like I wasn't as shy, and like when he'd pick on me, I'd pick on him back. So we started to have this like friendship dynamic, which was nice because I always felt super uncomfortable before when he'd just pick on me, and I was just like,
okay.
But yeah, and then when I turned 19, I don't really know what exactly changed. I think I was probably feeling like more self-confident, at least as far as appearance-wise, what looked like I was self-confident. And so like we had this kind of like playful friendship where he'd pick on me and I'd pick on him, and if he did something stupid, I'd call him out. It was way more comfortable, let's say. And it was just nice because it was such an improbable friendship. You know, when you meet someone and you think, oh, we're just never gonna get along, this is always gonna be awkward, whatever. Like, it was kind of like that. So when we started getting along, I was like, wow, this is kind of refreshing and surprising. And so he was in his late 40s when I was 19. I think he was like right before 50, like 48 or something like that.
And, Biff, get out! Get out! If you're gonna be like that, get out. Seriously? Like, please, I'm trying to do something here.
So he was like 49 or something like that. And I remember one day randomly, like I went to the hairdresser like a couple times while I was there, because I used to spend like 2.5 months there, and my hair is black, so between haircuts and dyes, and especially like beach water, I'd go back a couple of times. And especially because I barely ever go to the hairdresser like the rest of the year, so it's important that I go those couple of times. But anyways, I don't know how we got there, but he pretty much asked if I wanted to get drinks. So I didn't really think anything of it because we had this kind of playful dynamic thing. And for me, drinks meant aperitivo. So if you don't know what that is, it's pretty much like before lunch or before dinner, you go and get a quick drink and like eat a couple like finger food kind of things. It's like a pre-lunch or pre-dinner kind of thing. And it's not like getting drinks in the same way, you know, it's not really date material. And so I didn't think anything of it, and I was like, yeah, okay, sure, whatever. And as I was paying, like he'd already asked me this, and I was like, yeah, okay, sure. He's like, wait, how old are you? And I was like, guess. And then he was like, oh, like 25, 26, which I thought was hilarious because I don't think I looked that old. Maybe it was just him trying to kid himself, I don't know. And then I was like, no, lower. And he kept guessing lower, and every time I said lower, he would become like more and more horrified, and like until he got to 19, I was like, yeah, I'm 19. And he was like, oh, wow. And he was like taken aback, so I felt really uncomfortable because I was like, do you not want to like go and get a drink? Like I thought it was like platonic, like friendship wise the whole time, so I didn't really think anything of it. Like even if there was this huge age gap, it wasn't a big deal because it's not like we were dating. So yeah, I just left wondering what the deal was at this point, but I didn't really want to ask because how uncomfortable would it be if I asked? He was like, yeah, I can't go get drinks with you, blah, blah, blah. And note, this hairdresser, like this salon is like, since this town is tiny, the salon is him and his assistant, and there are like, I think 4 or 5 chairs, and it's like relatively small, so everyone can really hear what you're saying. And I was like, I don't want to be in this situation, so I'm out. So I go back to the hotel that I stayed at, and I know everyone there too, and like the owner was like kind of like a father figure when I was younger, because he'd always like play with me and be like the man, you know, because my dad wasn't. I get a text message, and I hadn't given him my number, and so I was like,
what the fuck?
and obviously it was this guy who we will call the hairdresser, who we will call Paul. And it was him being like, oh, so when do you want to get drinks, blah, blah, blah. And so we decide to get an aperitivo before lunch at some point. I can't remember. And so I was like, okay. And then I realized later that he got my phone number, because when you like make a reservation there, you have to leave your number. But I don't know, it just like took me very aback after his reaction before. And so we go to this aperitivo, and it's cool. Like, we're just talking, whatever. It's not a big deal. And, you know, obviously since you can drink in Italy at 18, you know, like I'd been drinking for a while at this point, so it wasn't that a big deal in that sense either. And we just talked about stuff like fashion and hair, because like he was into, obviously he was a hairdresser, and he'd go to these conventions where they'd show you like all this new modern stuff, so we had a lot of interests in common, let's say. So yeah, and as things progressed, and note, I was there for 2 months and a half, so it's just like, this is a long span of time, you know? And this happened in the first few days I was there. So as times progressed, like, I remember I went by the hairdresser this one time because I needed information about a gym we both went to, and it was kind of far away, so I didn't want to go there, especially since I don't have a car, so I have to walk there when I'm in Italy, so I didn't want to.
Are you fucking kidding me?
Anyways, so I go and ask him about that, and he's like, oh, we should work out together, blah, blah. So long story short, we became workout buddies, so pretty much one day out of 2, he'd come to the gym with me, and we'd work out, and it was fun, because we'd just, like, bullshit, and, like, there were some really weird people. There were some really weird people there, and we'd just, like, make fun of people. I'm sure people made fun of us, whatever. And then he'd be like, oh, you should drop by, like, my salon more often. I was like, okay. Like, it was a friendly thing. And, you know, like, I called this crush because I don't think it was romantic in the sense that I wanted something to happen or thought something was going to happen, but I think I was more, like, infatuated with the idea that someone older wanted to be around me, if that makes sense, you know? So it's like, I never wanted to date him or anything like that. So it was kind of like, I was in love with the idea.
Not in love, Jesus. Pick your words.
I was just like very excited by the idea that someone would be interested in spending time with me and talking to me, you know, like I think my self-esteem was worse than it is now, and so that kind of also affected it, you know, like I didn't really think anyone wanted to be my friend, and I didn't really have that many friends apart from like my 2 best friends who were on other continents, so like I think that loneliness kind of also internalized a bit. And yeah, so like I was like, cool, like he wants to spend time, and I think I got kind of butterflies about it because of that, and I think it was kind of a crush because I always wanted to hang out, but it was more kind of like an infatuation based on idea more than like, oh, I want to date this person, whatever, okay? And so like at first I didn't really feel that way, but as we hung out more and more, I kind of started to feel more that way of like, wow, this is cool, whatever, and I was just really excited to have a friend who I guess gave me butterflies in a sense. I don't know what it means. I honestly don't know. And so yeah, and we had this dynamic where we would pick on each other, which I think also made it more comfortable because it was like a friendly thing. It wasn't like innuendos and all flirty. And so every so often I'd go by his salon, like when I went to the beach, because his salon was like on the way, and I'd be like, hey, what's up? And he had like a little couch where you'd sit to wait for appointments, and I'd sit there and we'd talk, and weird things started happening. So there's this woman who has a store in front of him, and it's like this really weird store that apparently is only open because her dad's funding it. Because it's like, this is a little beach town where most people are like 90 or like babies. And she had like this really weird kind of quirky store that just had no reason to like be open there just because nobody ever bought there. Literally there was no one ever in that store, and the clothing was super expensive, and I don't know, it was just a weird place. But I remember seeing her because she was this super short, super thin girl, and she always stood out. And I remember every time I'd go to the hairdresser, she would kind of always appear or pass by or come in, you know, just to talk to him. And she'd always gave off this really weird vibe of possessiveness over him, even if they weren't together, because I made fun of him for it. I was like, are you guys together or something? And he was like, no, like, we're just friends, whatever. And I was like, it's fine. Like, I was jealous. I just wanted to understand, like, why she kind of gave me this vibe of possessiveness over him, and then over me just kind of like vague dislike, when I never had a conversation with this woman. And note, she was probably like 40 years old or something like that, and I was 19, so why would you pick on someone? But
She wasn't picking on me, but kind of just making me feel uncomfortable.
so that happened, and I was like, okay, this is weird. And then another time, I was with Paul, and we were walking back from the gym, and we were just talking, whatever, and then I go back to my hotel, and the owner of the hotel is like, oh, so-and-so told me that he saw you with Paul. And I was like, who's so-and-so? Because, like, I had no idea who this person was. And he's like, oh, like, this friend of mine. I was like, what the fuck? Like, how is someone that I don't know, like, reporting on me? In a sense, in such a small town, you might know of someone, so I wasn't, like, creeped out, but I just thought it was weird that someone would go to the lengths to report on what I was doing, and, like, what? I don't know. And so I was like, yeah, like, we went to the gym, and, like, I remember the owner of the hotel was just, like, really weirded out by it. He was like, oh, okay. I just kind of walked away because it was really uncomfortable, so I was like, okay, goodbye, forever. And so things started getting weird in this way that people were acting weird about it, so I don't know, like, why, but it just escalated all of a sudden. And it was funny because sometimes I'd go by the salon, and Paul was like, oh, like, I have to run a couple errands, you want to come with me? And I was like, okay, sure, why the fuck not, you know? And I'd go with him just to buy groceries, like, boring stuff, you know? And so, and this happened a couple of times that he's like, come with me to run errands, and it was always groceries. And I was like, I remember this one specific time, I was like, so what, do I, like, inspire you to go buy groceries, like, every time I come by or something? And I remember he made this innuendo that I was totally taken aback by, and he was just like, no, you'd inspire me to do something else, but we can't. And I was like, what? I was like, where the fuck did this come from? And just like, what? Just because it had been such, like, a friendly thing, and I really hadn't gotten that vibe from him until this moment. So I was like, okay, what the fuck is going on? And so, like, I didn't really respond to that, but after that I started to get a very specific inkling that it was more than that to him. Or, like, I mean, he probably didn't want to have a relationship with me. He probably, like, wanted friends with benefits or something like that, which is ironic because I was still a virgin at this point. But yeah, so what happened after that? Yeah, so we kept hanging out, whatever, and then, like, sometimes in the afternoons he'd have, like, I don't know what it's called in English. It's kind of like when the grates that you pull down when, like, stores are closed, like, he'd have that pulled down, but it'd be, like, lifted a bit so you could crouch under, and he'd use that, like, when he'd come in on Sundays when the place was closed, he'd come in to douche in there, he'd leave it slightly open so he could just get in and get out without having to pull it all up or down. And he randomly texted me, and he's like, come get a coffee, like, I'm here, whatever. So, like, it felt really sketchy because I was, like, coming into his store from under the grate, and then, like, no one was there, and we were in this secluded space, and I just remember this extreme tension, and I don't even think it was, like, sexual on my part. I just felt very weird because I didn't know what was what this was. And, you know, like, as much as I had, like, those butterflies or whatever, I was also, like, very aware that his intentions towards me, if they weren't friendly, were probably of a sexual nature and not, like, you know, I want to have meaningful talks with you, not that kind of thing. But I kind of ignored that, and I remember drinking this coffee, and I just felt so uncomfortable, because, you know, when you're in a room with someone and you don't know their intentions, and you're just so aware of the space you're in, and this space wasn't that big, and I just remember feeling like my body was tight all over, because I was like, what is happening? And, so yeah, and he'd text me, and often ask me, like, weird things, like, this is, like, the escalation I'm talking about, like, he'd text me and think, like, oh, like, what do you think of me appearance-wise? Which I thought was such a funny thing coming from someone who's almost 50. I was
Do
like,
people still do this bullshit?
and I was like, I mean, you look good, you know, like, nothing like, oh, you're so hot, nothing like near flirty or sexy or anything like that. It was just kind of like, you look good, you know, like I'd say to a friend, you look good, whatever. And I just remember, like, these butterflies started turning into something weird, because at first it just felt so innocent and, like, a playful kind of flirtation, if anything. And then here it was, like, turning into, like, I don't know, it felt like he wanted to make it more concrete or get something out of it. Like, I'm not saying he necessarily had bad intentions, but he wanted something to happen. He wanted something to happen, that's for sure. And so as time went on in these 2.5 months, the next thing that happened was that we'd been going to the gym, we'd been hanging out, I'd been seeing him pretty much every day, and he was always a bit flirtatious. And I remember the next thing that happened was that I went to him to get a haircut, and I remember he was like shampooing my hair, which was weird because usually it's always his assistant who does it. And he was just asking me like a bunch of sexual questions. And note, this place is small, so even if you're whispering, there's a chance people can hear you. And he was like, oh, like, what are you like in bed? I feel like you'd be really aggressive, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, okay, we need to change conversation because A, I'm a virgin, and B, look, this is not a conversation for here and now. And especially since, like, we've never had this kind of conversation, so why would you do it in a public space? Like, but anyways, I guess I was really attached to the friendship because when the next thing happened, I was slightly devastated, which was, so he told me very briefly that he'd been in a 7-year relationship a while ago and that things were complicated in the sense that they were over, but his ex would often like try and get back together or like yell at him or be like jealous about things that she had no right to be jealous over. But he barely ever mentioned it, and I'd never seen her. I didn't even know if she lived in the same town, so I didn't really think anything of it. And then one day he tells me my ex is coming to town. And I was like, okay, like how does that have anything to do with me? And then he says, look, you know, if you come to the salon, I'm gonna have to act differently around you because the ex had those reactions like we know. And I was like, okay. I felt weird because I felt like he was trying to hide that we were friends. Not even like, you know, like I understand you're not going to make sexual innuendos to someone else while your ex is there. But it's like, it felt like he wanted to hide that we really had a friendship kind of relationship even in that basic way. And so I was like, okay. And I remember I went in once and his ex wasn't even there. And he was being extremely standoffish and kind of was hinting at me to leave. So obviously I just fucking left and I was like, okay, whatever. And so I kind of stopped going by because I felt, you know, like that awkward person who's self-inviting themselves. Like he always had asked me to drop by, but now it just seemed like that wasn't what he wanted anymore, so I stopped. And I felt really shitty because like apart from this like whatever infatuation thing it was just kind of like before everything we were friends in my mind, you know. And especially there, like I used to have friends, but we had a huge falling out and that's another story. So, you know, my best friend had been there for a while, but she left. And so, you know, apart from like my mom and my aunt, this was like the only person I was really hanging out with there who like I felt a nice mental connection with. So it was kind of shitty because, you know, like you think that you're closer to someone than you actually are, and then you find out that they don't consider you, I don't know, as important as you maybe consider them. I don't know. And I remember I bumped into him at the grocery store, of course, and he was super touchy. Like I had my back turned to him and I was like looking at something on a shelf, and he literally came up behind me and put his arm around my waist, and I was like, whoa, what are you doing? Like first I jumped out of my skin because you never expect that to happen to you at a grocery store where you know, where there's no one who touches you that way. And then the fact that he did it, especially when we kind of had this mini, like not falling out, just like awkwardness, and I was like, oh, hi, what's up, whatever. And then he asked me why I wasn't coming by anymore, and I was like, you know why. You told me, you know, that your ex was there, and then when I came by last time, you were super weird, so I don't know what's happening. And he told me, no, like everything's the same, whatever. So I started going back to visit him because he had asked me to. And briefly, for like a couple days, he was normal again, and he was just like, he was actually being more forward. He wasn't normal. He was just like, you know, I know we have a big age difference, and I know that we already have a solid relationship, which was a weird word to hear because I was like, what kind of relationship are you talking about? And then he's like, so do you want to like take this to the next level? And I was like, what next level? I mean, what even are we? We're like friends and you make innuendos and you don't even know if I exchange that and you're talking about having sex, probably. And I remember he just, I don't know, it's just like he wanted to be friends with benefits but wouldn't come out and say it, and I don't even know if that's what he wanted. Like he was being extremely vague, and I was just kind of getting tired of it because I was like, I thought we were friends and now this is becoming like a weird thing. And so I go back to see him the next day, just like everything's normal. I kind of like erased everything that happened. And I'm like, hey, what's up, whatever. And he was super standoffish, and I was like, really? it was just like such a hot and cold thing that I was just kind of like, I felt like shit already about it, and I was just like, okay, well, I guess we're nothing, not even friends, great. And later on, I found out that it is because someone came up to him and was asking what the deal was. And I think that made him uncomfortable because he felt like he was being some kind of Humbert in like the Lolita situation. Even if I was, first of all, not a minor, and second of all, we weren't even like that, so I don't know why you'd feel so uncomfortable. You could just tell someone we're friends, fuck off. Like, I don't see why that's so complicated, but I digress. And so I pretty much didn't see him, and if I did, it would be just like a very awkward, like, hello, and he'd try to talk to me, but I'd just like walk away before he could, because it's just kind of like, at this point, I don't really want to hear someone's excuses. Like, the way you can show how you feel by how you act, you know, like, I don't want to hear you say, oh, come by, and then for you to be standoffish and for me to feel extremely awkward and stupid. So I remember the day before, so I think in like a couple of weeks, like, we pretty much were not, just nothing. Like, he didn't come to the gym anymore. I don't know if he was specifically avoiding me or what, but whatever. I didn't go to the hairdresser specifically. And I remember the day before I left, I was like, okay, I'm just gonna go say bye to him, because, like, you know, like, I felt like it would be shitty to just leave and not see him for another year on those terms. So I was like, I just went by and I was like, hey, like, I'm leaving. I just wanted to say bye. I hope things go well with you until I see you next year, whatever. And he hugs me goodbye. And then I remember it was the weirdest thing. He, like, there was only his assistant and she was in the back, so we were pretty much alone. And he, like, puts his hands on my shoulders, and we were really close to the point where I felt really uncomfortable and kind of wanted to step back, but I couldn't because he was holding my shoulders. And he's just like, I'm sorry it was this way, but people were starting to notice.
And I was like, could you be any more, like, weird and mysterious and infuriating?
Because I was like, what do I do with that kind of thing? Like a riddle. Like, I honestly just didn't really know what to do with that. And I was going to ask for an explanation, but then his assistant came back in, so he let go of my shoulders, and I stepped back, and I was just kind of like, okay, that's the end of that, you know. And I expected to just, like, not hear from him again. I expected things to be really awkward when I next saw him the next year. And yeah. I think it was like a week or two later, I was out to dinner with my aunt and her friends, and I get a text message from Paul, and he says, hey, how are you doing? Whatever bullshit. And I was like, I'm good, how are you? And then he's like, I'm good, I was just thinking of you. And I was like, oh, okay, that's nice. Like, what am I supposed to do with that? And it felt shitty because it felt kind of manipulative, like he was pushing me away before, and now he's kind of like trying to reel me back in when I'm not even there anymore, when it's convenient, you know, because he can decide when to text me and when to ignore me. And I was like, oh, like, how are things? I kind of tried to move the conversation another direction. And then we just had a basic, really kind of boring conversation, and then he said, he was out to dinner apparently too. He's like, I'm at dinner with my friends and they're telling me to get off my phone, but I don't want to. And I was like, why not? You know, like, what are you doing on your phone that's more interesting than being with your friends? And he's like, I don't want to stop talking to you. And I just said goodbye at that point. I was like, I'm done with this. Like, this is ridiculous. And yeah. So I still don't know, like, where I stood, where I stand, whatever, but that's the story of when I had a crush on an older guy and how well that worked out. Thanks for listening.